With us today, the Athletics' Ollie Kay and Paul Ballus, and we'll be hearing from our German football writer, Raphael Honigstein, as well. Such a huge game this weekend, then. I feel, Ollie, it can be argued, as well as the big draw of the two clubs, we've got two big draws in terms of head coaches as well.
Oh yeah, I mean if you talk about the most influential individual of at those two clubs, I mean, yes, you could talk about Van Dijk and Rodri and Salah and Haaland, but I think ultimately, if you look over the period as a whole, you would talk about Klopp and Guardiola and the enormous impact that they've had on English football, on their clubs, on their teams, on the fan base, on the media. It's that they are undoubtedly a huge part of what those clubs have done over the last few years, but maybe the biggest factor of all. So yeah, when sometimes it can be a little bit unconvincing, so sometimes you walk down to like Wembley Way, or you see the pre-match images on Sky when they've got the managers' images flashed up as if to suggest, that this is the guy. And sometimes you think, well, that particular manager doesn't really evoke the spirit of the team to me. But with these two, he certainly does.
Yeah, there's something that's always fitted in terms of Jurgen Klopp managing Liverpool. I feel like the manager that did his job at Borussia Dortmund, he has kind of been the same kind of manager with Liverpool. Everything in terms of the energy and the personality he had there, he has kind of then taken on and delivered throughout his time at Anfield as well, Ollie.
Yeah, I went to interview Klopp in Dortmund. I think it was 2013, so a few months after the Champions League final that you got to with Dortmund, and I came away from that thinking, I could really see him in the Premier League, and you could see him at, for example, Liverpool. Liverpool were going really well under Brendan Rodgers at the time, but you feel like he would click and chime with certain clubs. I think he's more of a Dortmund manager than a Bayern manager. I think he's more of a Liverpool manager than an Arsenal or Manchester United manager. I don't know. There's a sort of cult of the individual around Liverpool managers, and it dates back to Bill Shankly, and I think sometimes it doesn't quite fit. I think sometimes people project a personality onto the managers rather than see what the personalities are. But in the case of Klopp, I mean, he's just a perfect fit. He suits that kind of club, not an underdog club at all, because Liverpool are an establishment club, but of the establishment clubs in Europe, they're one that sort of has that kind of blue collar image, real kind of us and the people image, and sometimes it seems quite fake when you look at what Liverpool are at ownership level and what they are at a corporate level. But in terms of that connection between players, fans, crowd, the club as a whole, he absolutely embodies that and has well, I say embodies that. He has recreated that bond, and the energy that he brings not only to the players but to the fan base, etc., is one of his absolute defining traits.
And Paul, with Pep at Manchester City, I mean, it seems that club it kind of embodies a lot of what Pep is like and about, and that now seems to have become a very sort of they're very synchronized in what they are and who they are and how they do things, really kind of gelled together.
Yeah, just now, like listening to Ollie, I mean, I just think that City is like sort of City and Pep are sort of like a perfect marriage, but basically because City wanted to become that, and City made everything happen to make Pep like the perfect fit. So now, if you look at City project and like what they've built over the last years, you'd say that probably like the strategy that they followed is like signing like the best expertise that you find in the world football. They thought that the best like the best people to be like on the top or like former Barcelona executive in Ferran Soriano and Chico Stein, and throughout all the journey, all the trip that they designed, you got the feeling that the last station or just the last destination or the final destination basically was Pep, was just getting Pep. And if alongside the way, like you have to wait and take Pellegrini for some years, it's a price that they were willing to pay basically. That was my feeling. When I spoke to those sort of senior sources at the club. And yeah, basically just the way that they have structured the club around Pep, knowing how he was from his Barcelona days, how to take the best out of him, and at the same time, like prevent him to get into like problems that he shouldn't be taking care of. It's all being like built to make Pep feel comfortable, and at the same time, I think that Pep has provided this sort of like, because Pep has been like in elite jobs, and Man City, of course, is like possibly like the biggest elite job now in English football. But I think that Pep has had this in him of like teaching your team how to play. Like in Barcelona, like of course Barcelona had an identity, but he redefined that and he went to an extra level. Then he went to Bayern Munich. That Bayern Munich, like Pep is a disciple of Johan Cruyff, and Johan Cruyff, when he was a footballer, there was like this like duality with Johan Cruyff and Franz Beckenbauer. So then Pep decided to go to Beckenbauer's club and to play on his way in there, which he did it like in a sort of like humble approach, if you want to call it that way, or like an approach that wanted to make it swift for all the parts. But he wanted to teach them to play in his way. And at Man City, there's a sense of that Pep brought him to the very best elite, and he taught them like how to face every Champions League game, how to have this mentality, and how to develop that. That, in my opinion, like deep down, like possibly clubs like Man United or like Liverpool, they have been more used to see that in the past. And City fans hasn't, which is not a bad thing. But I think that at the same time, it's been like a perfect place for Pep just to shine and just to spread his knowledge, if you want to call it that way.
It's interesting with Pep Guardiola. Have you seen him develop? Is he a different manager on the touchline at Manchester City in terms of how animated he is, or was he always like that at Barcelona as well?
I think that this agitation in himself, I mean, it's been there like all his career, and he's like really passionate, and he was like that at Barcelona, maybe more than what we see right now. What has changed more in Pep, in my opinion, it's like the inside management with players in the training sessions, the intensity that he lived through his profession. Basically, on his Barcelona days, I was not covering Barcelona because I was like a teenager back then, but I can remember that he had like a secret office like on the basement of the Camp Nou, because like the basement of the Camp Nou is like full of like offices and like bedrooms in case like any player had to, back in the days from La Masia, had to sleep in there at some point. So Pep had like his secret office, and he could spend like hours and hours, like just the day before game, going to sleep at just like at 2 a.m. just like sort of designing tactical patterns to beat the opposition. I think that Pep has learned that, I mean, being the obsessive that he is, that he can like do it like in a different way. And the approach that he has with players, I think that he started his first big job being friends with a lot of players and knowing a lot of players like on a personal level and like sharing dressing room. And I don't think that it ended up in the best possible way, because when he left Barcelona, one of the reasons that he decided to leave was because the relationship with some big players was not the best one, and just he decided to let everything go for the sake of the club, basically. And I think that at Man City, although he's still like a really passionate man and a man that wants to be close to his players, he's got more of a professional approach. Like, you're the player, I am the manager. I'm gonna make a call that you will probably won't like it, so I'm not gonna get too close to you. So I think that this has changed a bit with Pep. And I think that, as I was saying just before, that all the setup and the structure that City has built around him in terms of like decision making has helped him into becoming this figure as well.
I feel like we maybe sometimes make a lot of what happens with managers and head coaches on the touchlines and how they act and what is classed as passion and these sort of things. It's really interesting. Alan Shearer has written for us on The Athletic today, saying how Klopp and Guardiola's touchline act is all about giving out messages. It's messages to the players, messages to the supporters, even for the officials and opposition, if they can, if they need to put that across. But it's not just theatrics. It kind of has a reason, and that spectacle, Ollie, is kind of important, isn't it? I guess in terms of how they operate and how they actually rule these two clubs.
Yeah, and it's reached a stage now where a manager who is seen as quiet or sort of passive on the touchline is criticised for that. I mean, I think back to some of the great managers. Bob Paisley wouldn't have been somebody who was animated on a touchline. Neither would Brian Clough or someone like that for the most part. And Arsene Wenger would rail against managers and fourth officials and sort of throw his arms up and struggle with his zip, but he wasn't a sort of massively animated tub thumper of a motivator in terms of the way he engaged with the crowd or his own players. Neither was Ferguson. Ferguson would reserve most of it for for the fourth official and for the referees. So there is this sort of different, I don't know, it feels genuine when those two managers do it in their different ways, but because they are so successful, you see other managers thinking that almost like trying to copy that because it's so much a part of what they see. It's probably the one part of what Guardiola and Klopp do that they think, oh, I could easily copy that. Just the body language, the histrionics, the theatrics. I mean, it's not just for effect. Or just for sort of appearance's sake. It's for effect, and it's to try to energize the players, as you say, energize the crowd as well. So it's but it's interesting how we often call managers box office if they're lively in interviews or if they're lively on the touchline. And sometimes, like Mourinho was often described as box office, and his team's football really wasn't box office. The box office thing would come from him, whereas you say, you'd say, looking at Guardiola's and Klopp's teams, yes, they are very animated. You can't take your eyes off them on a touchline at times, but also the football their teams play in different ways is box office. It's that so energetic, so fast. Man City can be very patient in possession when they have to be, but in terms of the brilliance of what Man City have produced over the last 7 or 8 years, it's that has been box office as well.
And the interesting thing there, Paul, is that as a rivalry almost between Klopp and Guardiola, they've kind of fed off that from each other. This is sustained through whilst they've both been in the Premier League, and even when one team has maybe not been quite at it, you've always sensed it's there. I'm curious how maybe important those rivalries are to Guardiola. He must feed off them, and must have done in the past, and must be the case with Klopp too.
Absolutely key. Absolutely key. I can remember one of the last times that I spoke with Pep, it was this season actually. And we were speaking like about all the contenders, all the title contenders that the Premier League has compared to all the leagues in the world. Like, I mean, you have Arsenal now, maybe Tottenham is coming now with Ange. You never know about Man United or what happens with Chelsea and Newcastle and all the teams that are just coming up. And he was like, yeah, and that's absolutely correct, basically. But I think that my time at Man City will be defined by my rivalry with Liverpool. And that's gonna, like, just in the day that I decide to leave. I mean, this is gonna be defined. This is gonna be what I remember, like the first years, how we like beat each other basically off. Because, like, I think that from the footballing point of view, they are also like really their own nemesis, if you wanna say it like that. Like, one is like this rock and roll, the other one is like this structure way of playing football, like with the traditional game, you have to follow an order. So I think that this just has created like some sort of like fuel just to keep going to both of them. I think that what you were saying, like on the behavior, like in the touchlines, it's been something that has created even like a bigger thing probably, and has like animated all the fan bases behind the clubs as well. I think that, like, back in the days, I think that if you ask like both dressing room members or like coaching staff from both teams, I'm sure that like they would have been angrier at how the opponents were like behaving on the touchline. But of course, that's like sort of part of football. But yeah, no, it's just like interesting what you were saying as well about like the box office thing, because I think that also now is happening this thing that a lot of clubs are like investing on managers because of they have worked with Pep or Klopp or with like these sort of big managers, and like you have the feeling that clubs, like from the marketing angle, like from the optics angle, you need to behave a bit like that and just to be this not cocky personality, but this bold personality, like in the press room as well, to be more like Pep or to be more like Klopp, which is not really true. But at the same time, like it just tells you how much they have defined this era on English football and in world football in general.
It absolutely does. Let's hear now from our German football writer, Raph Honigstein, on how he feels Guardiola and Klopp have impacted each other in the Premier League.
Pep Guardiola has been Jurgen Klopp's nemesis. And this is not just in England. People sometimes forget that it was the allure of Pep that helped Bayern take away Mario Götze from Borussia Dortmund, a key figure in Klopp's team, and started the process of that team unraveling. Of course, Lewandowski leaving a year later didn't help either. And Dortmund domestically just could not keep up. And Bayern opened a huge gap that has never been closed. In England, of course, things went further still because those two teams have been mainly challenging for the Premier League in recent years. And in order to win the Premier League, one had to beat Pep Guardiola's City. Now, Klopp has done it. He came very close on 2 more occasions, and he might still do it this year. But there's no doubt that he would have won many, many more trophies. Maybe not so much in Germany, but certainly in England if it hadn't been for Pep.
We're asking you to fill out a quick survey about you and your podcast habits by going to theathletic.com/survey24. 3 lucky entries will win £100 or dollars worth of Amazon vouchers too. So whether you're a long-time listener or a new one, we want your feedback. So head to theathletic.com/survey24 now. I'll be honest, I do not feel jealous of Premier League managers because they have a huge job managing a bunch of Premier League players and egos. And not just Premier League, obviously, that goes for any elite football club, basically. It strikes me as a really, really difficult job when you've got so many huge characters in a dressing room as well. So with Pep Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp specifically, as we're looking at today, the fact, Ollie, they have these big personalities themselves, but that must be a huge asset. But I'm conscious, how do they go about managing this group of players where they'll be dealing with some characters who probably think they're bigger than the manager and some who don't?
I don't imagine there are players or many players in those two dressing rooms who would feel that they are bigger than the manager. I think the influence that both managers have, the personality, the leadership that they have is such that, yeah, I think the players generally, if not totally subservient, that there are big personalities, but they're not, it's not one of those, well, neither of them is the type of dressing room where you think there are egos out of control there. And I think he keeps on top of that. And I think they have both gone after players who have been hungry up, and they're not generally players who are on the slide, who are on a downward slope in the career, think, oh, I've done it all. I know better than this manager, like other clubs have, and probably like those clubs have in the past. They've gone for really, really hungry, intelligent players who, on a basis of their personality as well as their profile, are the type who will really warm to a different way and will be good learners and will be good characters. So I think that is a big part of it. You look at, we were talking earlier about both being alpha male types. I think Klopp is an alpha male type, but I would say Guardiola is a different type of leader. He's I always felt, looking at him at Barcelona in particular, he seemed like this sort of tortured genius who probably had to overcome a sort of personal shyness almost. He didn't have the personality of Mourinho, who was in Madrid at the time. He probably doesn't have the personality and sort of strength of personality of someone like Klopp. But I think he's developed that more and more, where he's become somebody who's more thick-skinned, more durable, more resilient, more sure of himself, and more willing to back himself, less sort of agonized by self-doubt, which I think perhaps was a factor in those. Certainly that final season at Barcelona, he seemed sort of completely agonized by everything there. So I think they're different characters. I still don't think either of them would really relish dealing with a sort of uber alpha male footballer. You know, you think when Ibrahimovic went to Guardiola, and Guardiola just didn't want to deal with that. He sort of distanced Ibrahimovic sort of in the dressing room and even within the team setup, playing wide. And you read Ibrahimovic's book, which is ludicrous, by the way. It's I mean, I'm sure it's meant for people to sympathize with him, but I ended up sympathizing entirely with Guardiola when I read this. But it shows that Guardiola was not comfortable dealing with that type of personality. I think I would guess Klopp would be more comfortable with a real sort of alpha male type, but I don't think it's really the type of football he wants to manage. I think they both want really hungry, up and coming, fit, energetic, just passionate, intelligent footballers, and that's what they've both filled their squads with. And I think that is a huge part of their success, because they know how to press the buttons of these players. And it's very rare that, you know, Calvin Phillips didn't chime with Guardiola at all, but it's very rare with both these managers that you get a player that they don't really know how to press the buttons of that player, that they both excel at it in different ways.
There's like a really interesting thing in what Oli said about Ibrahimovic and Barcelona and Pep, and I think that this sort of like exemplifies why he has stayed at Man City for so long, which is like, I mean, when you look down at what City has done over the last years, there's been like some great business, but there's been like some bad business, just as like extending Joao Cancelo's contract just a year before they just come to a head with Pep, basically. Which, from the business point of view, Cancelo, I think that he has a contract until 2027, if I'm not wrong, which is like still a long way, knowing that he cannot play back for Pep because that's over. So if that would have happened like in Barcelona, this sort of like the decisions of like the club making a mistake, because at that point Cancelo like looked like the best fullback in Europe, and the club believed that it was worth it to like extend his contract. If you do that at Barcelona, there's like people who's not gonna forgive you, and like you have made that like invest this sum of money like in a player that you liked, and now you don't like him, and now we have to work to get rid of this problem for you. And with Ibrahimovic, it sort of happened. It was a request from Pep because he believed that it would make the team better. It didn't, and it created a lot of problems inside the dressing room. And then the next season, they just get rid of him, with people inside the club not forgiving Pep that, and just like, and feeling like conspiration behind the scenes and behind the back, which is something that Pep didn't enjoy, and that just produced this sort of like tiredness that Oli was talking about as well. At City, it doesn't happen, because like if City understands that they have to get rid of Cancelo because you have to do it, so they just do it. And Oli has mentioned Calvin Phillips as well. I think that Calvin Phillips was a guy that everyone thought that he could fit at Man City, but at the end of the day, he didn't. It was like a bad business from the money point of view, and they just like accepted it and just moved forward. At Barcelona, that just wouldn't be the case, and at City, he has been able just to deal with that and just to operate with that and just to manage that in the sort of leadership that possibly he couldn't have at Barcelona, and that has created this sort of good atmosphere that he has here in Manchester. But yeah, in the same way, just as you were like discussing at the beginning of it, I don't think that there's a player that came into that dressing room not looking up to Pep. They all look up to Pep or to Klopp. I mean, I've not been that close to the Liverpool dressing room, but I'm sure that it's the same. There was also like this quote from Johan Cruyff back in the days that Pep has revealed in some books and interviews, that Cruyff said that to initially earn the respect from your players, you have to earn more money than them. Because if they see you like being like an expendable asset, like just earning like half of the wages that the best player of the team has, so they see you like as a fall guy, basically, that when things go south, you're going to be expendable, not them. So one of the rules that Cruyff has was like, I want to be the top earner in this club. So just to let you know, I'm going to be expensive, but just for a way of like having the respect of all the dressing room, because they know how things are here. And I think it's something that Pep had in mind as well, and it's something that in the man management has also played a part in his coaching style.
I feel like that trail of thought maybe hasn't quite reached Chelsea, possibly, and also maybe there's a discussion there over, say, the situation in recent years over at Manchester United as well, Ollie, where you sign a player like Cristiano Ronaldo as getting his return sorted, marquee signing, huge amounts of money, and almost from that point on, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer had a massive situation to deal with, and maybe there wasn't quite enough there. And I'm not just necessarily pinning it on Ole. Lots of different managers, they can't deal with those sort of situations in their relative form in the same way that Pep Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp can.
Yeah, and it's easier for Guardiola or Klopp to say, no, we don't want that superstar player because we're building this way. This is our way of playing. I've always thought with Manchester United over the last decade that their way of playing has never been so well established or so clear that they could reject any player on, I guess, style grounds. They had a certain way of playing under Solskjaer, and then Ronaldo was available, Varane was available, and they think, oh, okay, we'll do that, which is because they didn't have that sort of very clear vision, very clear way of playing, which Guardiola and Klopp in different ways have had from the start. That they've wanted players who would fit their way of playing and their way of managing, and it shows. It's the difference between being reactive to the market and reactive to everything, and being proactive and having a plan from the start and following it, not necessarily to the letter, but following it quite dogmatically, which both of them have.
Excellent. Well, I reckon it's a good time to hear back again from Raphael Honigstein, this time on how Jurgen Klopp deals with elite players and big egos.
Klopp once said that the one who brings the food is the king. So I think he was talking about the relationship between man and dog. But of course, it's a similar story in the dressing room. You might earn more money than the manager, but without the manager, you will not earn that money, certainly not at Liverpool. And I think that power dynamic is something he's very aware of. And without, I think, necessarily being political or egotistical, the players are very aware of that dynamic. And that, as Ferguson has always maintained, is a key part of that longevity, that degree of control and authority that comes from your personality, but also from your position in the club. A few managers become as powerful as he's been able to. And when players feel their power, those who are disgruntled, who somehow don't like his methods or want change, you don't hear these people. You don't hear these rumors. You don't hear people saying his workload is too high or he's too inflexible, tactical. When have we ever had these kind of briefings or murmurs? It all comes from fear, appreciation, loyalty, but also the power that Klopp has had.
I always think with Guardiola and Klopp that we only see a particular version of them, and maybe it's only if you're in the dressing room and around the club that you really see what they're like and how they are and what they're extremely good at. But I'm conscious, Paul, you've done a lot of digging in around Pep and the job he does. Where would you see his greatest strength and maybe his biggest perceived weakness as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that his greatest strength, and that's possibly easy to say or like simple to say, but the biggest point is like how lucid he is, because even like in terms of players who might have doubts or who might have concerns like approaching a game, he wins them over by like saying, look, you're going to play like this because this is going to happen then. And this happens. That's basically what all the players have said about Pep. And when you speak with them, and when you listen, I can remember listening Haaland this season in an interview saying that. And when you speak with players that have been managed by Pep off the record, they basically say the same. Like what you see on training, and you practice one thing, and it just happens. And there's like no room for the opposition to avoid that to happen. And I think that that's like the best strength, and possibly like the biggest weakness that he has is like in terms of the man management, which I've said in this podcast that he has improved and changed over the years. I still would think that is possibly one of the ifs or the things to improve that he might have. Basically, from the point of view that you're never gonna satisfy everyone in the dressing room like that. I also think that it's sort of a price to pay when you want to develop this sort of hungry elite mentality that all the players want to play better and play all the minutes and win. So you're gonna have at least like half of your squad that is not gonna be happy. But in terms of like this man management, I guess that the fact of like being too intense and just knowing when to be hard on a player who is going through a tough time and when not being that hard. I think this is the balance that I think that probably has angered more players alongside the way. But yeah, now I was thinking about Aymeric Laporte, who also left last summer. And one of the reasons was that his relationship with Pep. I mean, it wasn't like something that you couldn't deal with, but it was something that probably the best for both parts was like to move on. And even since like leaving, he would say like in interviews that from the tactical point of view, there's like nothing to say against Pep because like that's possibly his strength. But yeah, then of course, like in terms of like the personality wise and just how relentless and how demanding Pep is, you can have this sort of outcomes, of course.
Let's hear one more time from our German football writer, Raphael Honigstein, what he sees as Jurgen Klopp's biggest strength.
Asset as a coach is the ability to come with an idea and get people to buy into that and like this idea and feel that this idea is helping them to be successful. He's a great motivator. He's a great tactician, which is, I think, something that's often overlooked because he doesn't talk as much about the game. He doesn't look like the kind of guy that spends hours and hours on video presentation and analysis, but he actually is, in my view, superb reader of games, finds solutions during matches, and has a lot more depth than people appreciate. But ultimately, his personality is probably his biggest strength. He is, like his dad was, a natural born salesman. He can charm people. He can make them feel happy to be in his presence. He's got humor and he's got that drive that all good coaches have. So combined with that technical and tactical aspect that is often underrated, it's pretty much the perfect package for any manager.
Ollie, we've seen a lot of manager rivalries, haven't we, in the Premier League? I don't know if this one's maybe the classiest because they seem to have got on reasonably well with each other, or at least not had a big old spat necessarily, maybe, unless I'm forgetting one. So please remind me. But would you like to rank this one, Klopp v Pep, where it sits? Is it one of? Is it the greatest?
If we're talking purely about the managers and the sort of relationship, the rivalry between them, I think the best one would be Ferguson and Wenger, because that was, I mean, over such a long period. I mean, it did simmer down a lot towards the end as they both sort of realised we're getting a bit too old for this. But yeah, I mean, that to me defined the big sort of growth period of the Premier League in the late 90s and most of the 2000s. I think you would, in terms of that sort of antagonistic type rivalry, you'd probably mention whether it was Mourinho, Wenger, maybe Mourinho, Ferguson at times, maybe Benitez, Ferguson at times, Ferguson, Keegan, remember that one? But it's, in terms of the quality of the teams and being what I think have been, look, with the exception of the dips Liverpool have had in a couple of seasons, I think they've been the two best teams in Europe, therefore the world, for a good chunk of that time. That brings a sort of intensity because some of the games when we talk about this rivalry, the rivalry between the teams, I think that some of the matches between these two teams have been incredible. Some of the best matches that we've seen in the Premier League, incredible quality, and a lot of the time with Man United and Arsenal in, back in the day, the defining moments of those rivalries came in the tunnel. The tunnel at Highbury, the pizza throwing at Arsenal, press conferences, etc. Whereas I think this rivalry, without having the same kind of slapstick or box office element off the pitch or the antagonism between the managers, it's been really, really incredibly high quality on the pitch. And I wasn't really expecting Liverpool to come again to challenge Guardiola and City over the next, this season, but they have, and it was a really good high quality game at the Etihad earlier in the season. It will be the same, I suspect, at Anfield on Sunday. And it's as much as we're talking about the what they're like on the touchline, what they're like in the press conference room, what they're like in the dressing room, it's to me, it's what they do with their teams, the way they've managed their teams and coached their teams to be two of the best coached and best managed teams that I've seen, full stop, never mind just in the Premier League. Two of the best coached and best managed teams that I think there have been in the game. And that's what I look forward to even more than watching them on a touchline or more than watching them in the press conference.
For a moment, my mind did wander in terms of what it would have been like for peak Sir Alex Ferguson to come up against either of these guys. I think that we may have had some of the more theatrical elements pop in, possibly.
Yeah.
Pep Guardiola has joked that he's going to be glad to see the back of Jurgen Klopp, but I guess he would say that because he's just been such a staunch rival. And I guess it does raise the question how successful either club would have been without the other, Paul.
Yeah, no. I mean, I definitely think that Pep lives off that sort of rivalries. I mean, he needs that to just to be better and just to improve, and he needs to find that. It's those sort of things that you don't recognize when they happen to you, but afterwards, like you see, like with the calmness of everything. And yeah, no. I mean, I think, like City has had to like fight against Liverpool, not just in the football pitch, but also like I think that they were like antagonizing as well, like in the narrative around the clubs, because like they have like a lot of arguments just to difference themselves. And I think that Pep had to fight against that as well. Pep wanted to create like this atmosphere at the Etihad as well that the opponents can feel that they are like losing their minds in there. I think that, I don't know, we saw Real Madrid last season going to the Etihad at the Champions League, just like crumbling. This is something that Pep wanted to create, and that Liverpool fans, I think that they have like said, City, you don't have that, or sort of like we have created that, and I think that the fact of like playing against the top Liverpool side, against crowds at Anfield that have been at their best, it's what like has fueled Pep or has given Pep all the arguments to create that at City as well.
Yeah, you look at the way it's been in other leagues with, if you take Klopp's Liverpool out of the equation, in the Guardiola years, and apart from Arsenal coming, was it within 5 points of them last season? I mean, nobody has got near them apart from Liverpool. Liverpool beat them to one title and came within, was it 1 point on two other occasions? Man United have finished twice behind Guardiola City a couple of times, but never really been in a title race. Chelsea, Tottenham, Arsenal until last season, nowhere near, absolutely nowhere near. So you think what the Premier League would have been without, or maybe if it had been Klopp's Liverpool dominating, or more likely Guardiola City dominating without Klopp's Liverpool. And it would have been painful, I think, the last 6-7 years. It would have been the kind of one-horse races, processions that we've seen in Germany, in France at times, in Italy at times, in Spain, yeah. But it's I mean, because City have won 5 out of 6 and could well make it 6 out of 7, we're talking about an era. This would be the most dominant period by any team in English football history. But I don't think many of those league titles have been won at a procession. And that's largely been because of Klopp and Liverpool and because of Arteta and Arsenal last season and maybe this season again. But I think that it's helped the competition, but I also think it's kept Guardiola and City very, very committed and very. You've seen how Juventus in that period of dominating Serie A, eventually stagnated and were winning league titles without really looking driven, and they tail off. You see what's happened to Bayern Munich last season, and eventually this season they've come off. PSG at times. Man City have never looked like that team under Guardiola. One reason for that is the absolute driven perfectionist nature of Guardiola. Another reason is the challenge that they've had from Klopp and Liverpool. I think the fact that they've had that challenge from Klopp and Liverpool is what has kept Guardiola really, really totally engaged with it, rather than perhaps thinking after 4 or 5 years, do you know what, I fancy a new challenge. I don't feel like I'm being challenged or stimulated in this environment. Liverpool in particular and Arsenal now are challenging City, and I think rather than Guardiola thinking he would prefer a comfort zone, he loves this. He loves the challenge of being challenged year after year, and that's what that's been a godsend for the Premier League in a period when it would have been, it could have gone precisely down that sort of Bundesliga route, and looked very, very one-sided, which admittedly it will do if it's 6 titles out of 7, but it hasn't quite been like that on a match by match, week by week basis, and I think Klopp is a big factor in that.
Just to finish, we know Klopp is leaving this summer. There's no guarantees that Pep Guardiola will give Manchester City or the public as much notice when he does come to leave City. We'll have to see, but it's something that will happen at some point. How will each club fare without the other? This is for both of you. I'll come to you first, Paul. I mean, are City or Liverpool better prepared for that time when they lose a head coach, where everyone will be talking about the reign and how they enjoyed it? That bit afterwards is incredibly difficult.
You never know how all this will come down, because whenever any of those managers leave the club and the one that takes over them, they're going to be compared with Pep and Klopp, and like, how do you have to keep up to that level? And it's going to be tough for any of the succession plan that they are going to design. I know that at City, like, the senior executive plan to like help out the club in this transition after Pep, and just to like Varane, Cheeky, and Pep even like being like in hand with the club in terms of like planning what's coming next. I think it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. I think that, I mean, if we look at Barcelona, which is where I am now, like we are still like looking back to that, and like any manager that comes in is like, we know that you're not going to be Pep Guardiola, but we want you to resemble Pep Guardiola. So that's sort of like the benchmark and the legacy that they leave at the club, which is a good thing to have. It's a good problem to have, but at the same time, it's a thing that you have to process and you have to evolve from that. Because probably you're not going to have like such a dominant figure and such a like the perfect person in the role never ever in the future. So you have to be ready for that, and learn from the sort of like role model that they have created in that position. But I don't think that there's nothing that guarantees you that if you do that, like the succession plan, it's going to be okay and you're going to be sorted. There's just nothing to do that. It's just like trying to do the best, and let's see what happens.
Ollie?
Yeah, I look at the people in charge at Man City, and I think if any club is going to be capable of producing a really sort of slick, considered succession plan, it's probably them, because that they are extremely good at what they do. There's so much intelligence and stability and unity of vision in the building, but there's still no guarantee it will work. You can get somebody in who seems like the perfect person to take over from Guardiola, and they could make a really good start, have some big management challenge that's not of their doing in sort of after 3 or 4 months, and it could unravel. That kind of thing can happen. It's particularly in modern football, where everything feels so unstable, and you're not going to get given 4 or 5 years. You'll be expected to hit the ground running. Look at David Moyes signing a 6-year contract at Manchester United and being gone within 12 months, and all the problems that Man United have had since. But I look at Liverpool, and I would have said the same thing probably 2 years ago that I would back them to have as good a succession plan as it's possible to have. Obviously, huge shoes to fill, but the way things have gone at Liverpool the last couple of years, and this is a club that has been massively praised for thinking ahead, transfer-wise, thinking ahead, recruitment-wise, structure-wise, all the appointments behind the scenes. They've got no sporting director at the moment. There's sort of questions over a few people in other departments. There's players like Van Dijk, Salah, Alexander-Arnold, less than 18 months left on their contracts. The presumed need to get a sporting director in place before they appoint a manager. And this is a vacancy that has been there for, well, it's nearly 18 months since Julian Ward announced that he would be leaving. So I feel in Liverpool's case, they need to be able to sort of produce a rabbit from the hat at some point over the next 2 years. And maybe that rabbit is already there, whether it's a sporting director or whether it's a coach, Xabi Alonso or whoever. But at the moment, I think there are a number of questions to be asked about how Liverpool are prepared, or how Liverpool have or have not prepared. And I think even if the succession plan is perfect, there is no guarantee it goes smoothly, because they are absolutely huge shoes to fill in both cases.
Well, in the unstable world of football, I think that's maybe testament to the jobs that Jurgen Klopp has done and Pep Guardiola will continue to do at their clubs. That is our time for today. My thanks to Paul, to Ollie, and to Rafa for joining us. Don't forget, you can rate and review the podcast. Adam Leventhal is back tomorrow with the weekend preview, which will include thoughts and predictions for all the games this weekend. And I cannot wait for Liverpool against Manchester City on Sunday. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening.